The lights dimmed, and the audience hushed in anticipation. Tonight's episode of Late Night with Ethan Walker was already shaping up to be something special, but nobody in the studio, or anyone watching at home, could have predicted what would happen next. Ethan Walker, the charismatic TV host known for his sharp wit and tough questions, sat behind his desk, grinning like a wolf anticipating its prey. His guest was none other than the billionaire tech mogul Elon Musk, a man who had changed the world in ways most could only dream of. Tonight, though, Ethan was determined to challenge him. As the camera zoomed in, Ethan looked directly into the lens and gave the audience a knowing smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a real treat tonight. Elon Musk, the man who thinks he's changing the world. But I have to ask, does he really understand the consequences of his actions?" The tension in the air was thick. The audience shifted nervously, sensing that this wouldn't be a typical chat about SpaceX or Tesla. Elon sat calmly, his face unreadable. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes, those piercing, focused eyes, betrayed a deep awareness. He knew this wasn't going to be an easy conversation, but he was ready. Ethan leaned forward, his voice lowering, as if sharing a secret with the millions watching. "Elon, do you ever think about the impact of your decisions? The way people follow you blindly, hoping you'll save the world, but all you're really doing is building a new world for yourself? Isn't that a little selfish?" The studio went silent. The audience, on the edge of their seats, waited for Elon's response. Elon didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. "Ethan," he began, his voice steady, "it's easy to criticize from the sidelines. But the truth is, innovation isn't about playing it safe. It's about taking risks that others are too scared to take. It's about thinking ahead when everyone else is stuck in the past." A murmur spread through the audience. Ethan's confident grin faltered, just for a second, but he quickly recovered, leaning in even closer. "You're right, but how do you justify putting so much power in the hands of a few people? When does it stop being about innovation and start being about control?" Ethan's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension like a knife. Elon's expression didn't change, but his words did. "If we're not willing to take control of our future, then who will? The people who have power now aren't exactly doing a great job of taking care of it, are they? I'd rather be in the driver's seat, even if I have to steer through a storm." The audience sat in stunned silence, hanging on every word. The subtle challenge in Elon's response was clear. He wasn't just defending his actions. He was daring anyone to question his vision. Ethan stared at him, his face unreadable. "And you think that's going to be enough? To just keep pushing ahead with your grand ideas, without caring who gets hurt along the way?" Elon's eyes locked with his, and for the first time since he sat down, a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "Sometimes," he said, "change requires a little discomfort. People don't always like what's new, but they'll thank me later." Ethan raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by the response. The crowd, however, was starting to stir. Some nodded in agreement, others shifted uneasily. "Let me ask you this, Elon," Ethan pressed, shifting his weight. "What happens when everything goes wrong? When the risks you've taken collapse, and you're left with nothing but a pile of rubble? Is that really worth it?" The question hung in the air like a weight. Elon didn't hesitate. "If I'm not willing to fail, then I'm not really succeeding, am I?" The answer wasn't what anyone had expected. It wasn't the defensive, excuse-laden response many might have thought Elon would give. It was a challenge to everyone who doubted him, a challenge that seemed to cut deeper than anything the host could throw his way. For a brief moment, the tension in the studio felt like it was about to explode. The audience was now on edge, unsure of what would happen next. Would the conversation turn personal? Would Elon finally lose his cool? Ethan wasn't done yet. He turned his attention back to Elon, his voice now more curious than confrontational. "You speak of innovation and risk, but tell me, Elon, what drives you? What is it that pushes you to keep going, even when so many people are waiting for you to fail?" The question hung in the air, and the camera zoomed in on Elon's face. For a moment, he was silent, his gaze distant. It was as if he was searching for the right words, not just for Ethan, but for everyone watching at home. And then, In a quiet yet powerful tone, he replied, "It's simple. The future. The future of humanity. If I don't push, if I don't take these risks, who will? I don't just want to see the future, I want to build it." The weight of those words settled over the audience. It wasn't just a statement, it was a declaration. And it left everyone, including Ethan, with one thought. Elon Musk wasn't here to play nice. He was here to make his mark, no matter the cost. As the conversation continued, one thing became clear. This wasn't going to be a typical interview. And Elon Musk wasn't the man to be intimidated. This was only the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk was never a typical entrepreneur. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, he was a dreamer from a young age, fascinated by science fiction and technology. By the time he was 12, he had taught himself computer programming and sold his first game, Blaster, for $500. Most kids his age were worried about schoolwork and friends. Elon was already thinking about ways to change the world. But the road to becoming the billionaire tech mogul we know today wasn't an easy one. In fact, it was filled with struggles, doubts, and sacrifices that shaped him into the man who would go on to challenge the very fabric of space, electricity, and transportation. Growing up in a divided household, Elon's parents separated when he was young, a division that left an indelible mark on him. His father, Elon Musk, was a successful engineer, but their strained relationship left Elon with a sense of abandonment and a desire to prove himself. His mother, May Musk, on the other hand, was a model and dietitian who worked tirelessly to support her family. Despite the challenges, May became Elon's biggest supporter, constantly encouraging his curiosity and intelligence. Elon's mind was always restless, always seeking more. At age 17, he left South Africa, choosing to move to Canada for university, before eventually transferring to the University of Pennsylvania in the United States. He pursued studies in both economics and physics, the two fields that would serve as the backbone for his future ventures. In his early years, Elon experienced both failure and success in ways that few could comprehend. One of his first ventures, Zip2, an online city guide software, was sold to Compaq for nearly $300 million. Yet, despite the windfall, Elon wasn't satisfied. The feeling of just having money didn't excite him. It was the ability to make a tangible difference in the world that fueled him. And so, he went on to create X.com, which would eventually become PayPal, another success, but Elon was already looking ahead. Despite the financial success, Elon didn't enjoy the corporate culture of PayPal and left the company in 2000 after it was acquired by eBay for $1.5 billion. The departure was rocky, and it marked a turning point in his life. His critics said he couldn't keep a business afloat, but Elon wasn't listening. Instead, he was fixated on his next big idea, space. "I wanted to die on Mars," he would later say, "just not on impact." In 2002, with the money he earned from PayPal, he founded SpaceX, determined to reduce space transportation costs and make life multiplanetary. People thought he was crazy. At the time, NASA was the only player in space exploration, and private space companies were a distant dream. But Elon didn't care. He was already well aware of the critics who dismissed him as nothing more than a pipe dreamer. But he wasn't giving up. SpaceX wasn't a quick success. In fact, the first 3 launches failed, and SpaceX was on the brink of bankruptcy. The pressure was immense. People whispered behind his back, saying he was wasting his money. But, as always, Elon remained calm, working tirelessly with his team to get the rockets right. The 4th attempt succeeded, and SpaceX was on its way to revolutionizing space travel. It wasn't just SpaceX, though. Elon was creating entire industries. Tesla, the electric car company he took over in 2004, was another of his audacious ventures. The company was struggling, but Elon's investment and leadership helped transform it into the most valuable car manufacturer in the world. He also founded SolarCity, a solar energy services company, to address one of the world's most pressing issues, climate change. Elon wasn't just making money, he was on a mission to save the planet. He saw renewable energy, electric cars, and space exploration as the 3 pillars of humanity's future. But even with all the success, Elon had his critics. The media often painted him as eccentric, out of touch with reality. His Twitter feed, filled with unfiltered thoughts and bold statements, only fueled the controversy. But Elon was never one to back down. As he sat on that stage with Ethan Walker, the tension in the air was palpable. Elon knew this wouldn't be just another interview. Ethan's questions were personal. He wasn't asking about Mars or electric cars. He was asking about Elon Musk, the man. The question about control had clearly struck a nerve with Elon, but what the audience didn't know was that Elon had been facing this internal struggle for years. The pressure to innovate, to lead, and to change the world wasn't just a corporate challenge. It was a personal one. Every decision he made came with the weight of the future on his shoulders. The relationship with his family, too, had always been a delicate balance. His mother, May, was proud of him, but there were times when she worried about his obsession with success. His 5 children, whom he shared with multiple partners, were a constant reminder of his human side, even if he didn't always show it. Elon had never been one to display his emotions, preferring to keep his focus on the mission. But it wasn't just family or critics that made his journey difficult. Elon often found himself at odds with the very people who helped him build his companies. The engineers at SpaceX, the designers at Tesla, many of them didn't always agree with him. But Elon's relentless pursuit of perfection often meant that he pushed his team harder than most could handle. Some of them burned out. Some of them quit. But the ones who stuck around? They were the ones who believed in him, even when the world seemed to doubt him. The following days after Elon Musk's appearance on Late Night with Ethan Walker were filled with buzz. Clips from the interview went viral, sparking heated debates on social media, in newsrooms, and even in boardrooms. Some praised Elon for his unapologetic stance, while others critiqued his apparent disregard for the consequences of his actions. But for Elon, the heat was nothing new. He had been at the center of controversy for years, with every new venture drawing a line in the sand. People either loved him or loathed him. There was no middle ground. Yet, it wasn't the critics that concerned him. What mattered was the mission. That night, after the interview wrapped up, Elon sat in his hotel room, staring at the city lights outside. The questions Ethan had asked lingered in his mind, more than he was willing to admit. The accusations of selfishness, of playing God with the future, were they valid? Was he too focused on innovation, too obsessed with his vision of the future, to recognize the collateral damage? He knew he was taking risks, big ones, and he knew that not everyone would understand. But that had never stopped him before. He had always believed that the future was something to be built, not inherited. Yet, the more he thought about Ethan's words, the more they gnawed at him. Elon wasn't one to let emotions sway his decisions, but the doubt creeping in was different. It wasn't about the way he worked or what he had achieved. It was about the way others saw him. Was he really as reckless as people said? The next morning, the phone rang. It was a familiar number, Kimball Musk, his brother, and someone who had been a constant presence in Elon's life. Kimball was the more grounded of the Musk brothers, with a natural ability to read people and situations. Elon picked up the phone, ready for their usual lighthearted conversation. But today, Kimball's voice was different. "Elon," Kimball began, his tone serious, "I've been seeing what's been going on. The interview, the backlash, the way people are spinning this. I need to know, how are you feeling about all this?" Elon sighed. He had always prided himself on staying composed, but his brother's straightforwardness always seemed to cut through his walls. "I'm fine," he said quickly. "It's just the usual. People love to attack, but they'll get over it." "That's not what I'm talking about," Kimball pressed. "I mean, how are you really feeling? You've always had a vision, and I get that. But do you ever think about the consequences? About the people who might get left behind?" Elon paused. His eyes drifted out the window, looking at nothing in particular. Kimball wasn't wrong. He had never been one to dwell on the negatives, but the thought had crossed his mind more than once. Could he really afford to keep pushing forward without understanding the full impact of his actions? "Of course, I think about it," Elon admitted, his voice quieter now. "But every day I wake up thinking about what's next. What's ahead? There's no time to second-guess myself. And if I start worrying about the fallout, I'll never get anything done." There was a brief silence on the line before Kimball spoke again. "Just remember, Elon, It's not always about being right. Sometimes it's about listening, understanding the bigger picture. You've always been the visionary, the guy who sees what others can't. But even visionaries have to know when to listen. Not everything has to be a fight. Elon sat back in his chair. His brother was right. He had always been the one to charge ahead, but there was a part of him that knew Kimball had a point. Perhaps he was too consumed by the idea of changing the world to truly understand how his actions affected the people around him. But then again, if he stopped now, if he slowed down to worry about every little thing, what would happen to the progress? Thanks, Kimball, Elon said after a long pause, his voice softer. I'll think about what you said. As he hung up the phone, Elon felt the weight of the conversation settle on him. For the first time in a long while, the confidence that usually carried him felt slightly shaken. But that's what this journey was all about, wasn't it? Pushing forward, questioning everything, evolving. He couldn't afford to stop now, not when the stakes were so high. Later that day, Elon found himself sitting at his desk in the SpaceX headquarters, reviewing data from the latest Mars mission. The numbers were promising, but the pressure was mounting. With every successful test, the bar was raised higher, and the world watched closely, waiting for him to fail. But there was no going back now. Elon knew that. He wasn't just building rockets and electric cars. He was building the future. And the future didn't care about how many people doubted him. The future was what mattered. As the day turned into night, the constant stream of messages, emails, and phone calls flooded his inbox, each one a reminder of the mountain he had yet to climb. Yet, through it all, Elon felt a sense of clarity that he hadn't experienced before. He didn't have all the answers. He wasn't perfect, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the work, the relentless pursuit of something greater than himself. And that night, as he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Elon knew that the journey was just beginning. The road ahead would be filled with more challenges, more questions, more conflicts. But he was ready. He had to be. The world watched as Elon Musk continued to push the boundaries of what was possible, but something was shifting beneath the surface. Behind the headlines, beyond the public praise, there was a sense of impending change. Something unexpected was brewing, and it was only a matter of time before it came to a head. Elon had always thrived under pressure, but this time, the weight he felt was different. The stakes were higher, and the opposition was stronger than ever. It wasn't just about making a profit or launching rockets into space anymore. The world was watching closely, and his every move was being scrutinized. Missteps were no longer just about business failures. They were about the future of humanity itself. The moment came one chilly October evening when Elon sat down for what was supposed to be a routine meeting with SpaceX engineers. The mission was clear: prepare for the next major milestone, an unmanned mission to Mars. It was an exciting time for everyone at the company, and yet, a dark cloud hung in the air. Tensions among the team had been building for weeks, and now, those tensions were about to spill over. One of the lead engineers, Raj Patel, had been with SpaceX for years. He was a brilliant mind but had grown frustrated with Elon's micromanagement and relentless drive for perfection. The ambitious deadlines Elon set often left little room for error, and Raj, along with a few others, had reached their breaking point. As the meeting commenced, Raj spoke up, his voice calm but filled with an underlying tension. Elon, with all due respect, I don't think we're ready for the Mars mission. We're pushing the team too hard, and the pressure is taking its toll. People are getting burned out. We're not making progress the way we need to. For a moment, the room fell silent. Elon looked up from the table, his sharp gaze focused on Raj. His face was unreadable, but those who had worked with him for years knew this look. It was a mix of intense focus and frustration. I don't have time to wait for people to be ready, Elon responded. His tone was direct, but there was something in his voice that hinted at the internal struggle he had been carrying for weeks. Mars isn't going to wait for us. The future of humanity isn't going to wait. We have to move forward. We can't afford to be hesitant. Raj stood his ground, his voice unwavering. But Elon, we're only human. We can't keep pushing ourselves this way. We need time to get it right. Elon's fingers drummed on the table, his mind racing. He had always been one to push the envelope, to challenge the impossible. But what if Raj was right? What if, in his quest to change the world, he had lost sight of the very people who had been helping him get there? The silence in the room grew thick, heavy with the unspoken words that hung between them. For a brief moment, Elon felt the weight of it all. The dreams, the expectations, the relentless pursuit of something that could reshape history. And yet, here he was, standing at the crossroads between progress and personal cost. It wasn't just the engineers who were feeling the strain. The pressures on Elon's personal life were mounting as well. His relationships had always been tumultuous, and the more he immersed himself in his work, the more distant he became from those he cared about most. His ex-wife, Justine Musk, had recently spoken out in an interview about how Elon's obsession with his work had strained their marriage. She had been supportive at first, but the years of late nights, endless travel, and never-ending deadlines had taken a toll. Elon, for all his brilliance, struggled with balance. Work was his constant, and everything else often fell to the wayside. At the same time, his relationship with his children had become more distant. The sacrifices he made to push forward his vision were beginning to feel like they came at too high a personal cost. He had made a deal with himself that the ends justified the means, but now, in the face of mounting criticism and strained relationships, those ends seemed more uncertain than ever. Later that evening, as Elon sat alone in his office, the quiet buzz of the city outside his window felt distant. He needed clarity. His vision had always been clear: a sustainable future, a multi-planetary species, a world powered by clean energy. But as the weight of his responsibilities pressed down on him, Elon couldn't help but wonder if he had gone too far. He reached for his phone and scrolled through messages, briefly pausing at a text from Kimball. "Don't lose yourself in the mission. It's not all about getting to Mars. It's about the people who are with you on the journey." Elon put the phone down, letting the words sink in. It wasn't just about Mars or Tesla or the next big leap in technology. It was about the human connections, the relationships, the people who had believed in him from the start. Could he continue to lead them without losing sight of that? Or had the ambition consumed him to the point where he could no longer see the world around him? The next morning, Elon gathered his team. There was no grand speech, no words of encouragement. Instead, he simply said, "We've been pushing too hard. I've been pushing too hard. And I think it's time we recalibrate. We need to take a step back and remember what we're doing this for, together." It was a rare moment of vulnerability for Elon. He wasn't used to admitting fault, but something had shifted. Maybe it was the realization that progress didn't always have to come at the expense of the people around him. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the understanding that the greatest breakthroughs weren't just about the technology. It was about the people who made them possible. As the team left the meeting, there was a quiet sense of relief in the air. Elon hadn't abandoned his vision, but for the first time, he was willing to acknowledge that the journey, like any great mission, was not just about the destination. In the days that followed, the shift in Elon's approach began to ripple through SpaceX and Tesla. The entire atmosphere seemed to lighten, with employees working not just with the urgency that had become the norm, but with renewed purpose. Elon's acknowledgement that they needed to take a step back and refocus on the people behind the innovation made a huge impact. But despite the calm exterior, something bigger was brewing, something that none of them could have predicted. In the midst of all this, the world's gaze was fixed firmly on Elon. Public opinion was split. Some praised his leadership, calling it a sign of true greatness, while others questioned whether his shift in tone was too little, too late. The media, ever hungry for drama, twisted the narrative. They painted Elon as a man who had been broken by the pressure, a leader who was realizing too late that he could no longer control the forces around him. But in private, Elon was far from broken. He was determined. The emotional storms that raged inside him, confusion, doubt, guilt, were all the fuel he needed to push even harder. Despite his shift in priorities, he knew he couldn't let up on the ultimate mission: saving humanity, taking the first steps to colonize Mars, and ensuring a future free from the looming threats of climate change. The stakes had always been high, but now, with the personal stakes climbing as well, Elon was more motivated than ever to prove that his vision was worth every sacrifice. Then came the news that would rock his world: SpaceX's next Mars mission. an unmanned spacecraft meant to test long-duration space travel, had encountered a catastrophic malfunction during its final testing phase. The rocket, which was supposed to carry essential cargo for future colonization efforts, exploded during launch preparation, causing an expensive setback. The cause was still under investigation, but the immediate fallout was unmistakable. Elon was crushed. As the news broke, the social media firestorm erupted. Headlines screamed, "Elon Musk's Mars dream shattered in catastrophic failure. SpaceX rocket explosion, a blow to Musk's vision, and is Mars a dream too far for Elon Musk?" The barrage of criticism, much of it fueled by people who had never understood the enormity of the risks, felt like a personal attack. For the first time in years, Elon questioned himself. He retreated to his private office at SpaceX, staring at the wall, trying to process the failure. He had always been resilient, able to push through every obstacle, every setback, with relentless drive. But now, in the wake of such a devastating loss, the weight of everything he had worked for seemed almost too much to bear. His phone buzzed with texts and emails, some from his team, others from friends, and even a few from people in his personal life. Kimball's message stood out: "We all fall, but we rise again. You've got this." But even Kimball's words couldn't lift him. The failure felt like a rupture in his very identity. The pressure to succeed had always been there, but this was different. The world was watching, and for the first time, there were serious doubts about whether his grand vision was realistic, or whether it was just an expensive fantasy. Hours passed. The company was buzzing with the aftermath of the failure, but Elon remained in his office, his thoughts spiraling. It wasn't just about the rocket, it was about everything. Was he too obsessed with the future to see the present? Was the weight of his ambition too much for those who had stood by him, those who had worked tirelessly for the same dream? In the middle of his turmoil, a knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Gwynne Shotwell, the president of SpaceX, and one of the most trusted people in Elon's life. She walked in, her usual professional demeanor now tempered with a hint of concern. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked, sitting down in front of him. Elon didn't immediately respond. His mind was still reeling from the explosion, the failure that seemed to mock his every effort. But after a moment of silence, he spoke. "I don't know anymore, Gwynne," he admitted, the vulnerability in his voice startling even him. "Maybe I've been wrong this whole time. Maybe we're not ready for this. Maybe we're not even close. Maybe I've let this thing consume me so much that I forgot why I started in the first place." Gwynne leaned forward, her eyes steady, but her tone softened with empathy. "Elon, we've been through hard times before. We've seen failure. We've seen setbacks. But we've also seen the impossible become possible. This is just another bump in the road. And the mission? It's still the same. It's worth fighting for." Elon shook his head. "But the world doesn't see it that way. They don't understand the magnitude of what we're trying to do. All they see is a failure. All they see is a man who's too arrogant to admit he can't do it." "You're not that man," Gwynne countered. "You've never been that man. The world doesn't get to decide who you are or what you're capable of. You get to decide that. And I'm with you every step of the way. We all are." Elon took a deep breath, letting Gwynne's words sink in. It wasn't the reassurance he had wanted, but it was the truth. He had been through difficult times before. He had stared failure in the face and kept moving forward, and he would do it again. Later that night, as Elon sat alone in his office, the weight of his doubts finally started to lift. He had been knocked down, yes, but he wasn't out. The mission was still his, and the dream was still alive. This setback didn't define him. It didn't define SpaceX or Tesla. What defined them was the ability to rise again, no matter how difficult the climb. In the wake of the catastrophic failure, SpaceX's leadership had been shaken, but the company was far from broken. The engineers were busy in their labs, working tirelessly to understand the cause of the explosion, and the media frenzy was beginning to die down. But for Elon Musk, the battle had only just begun. The relentless pressure to move forward, to solve the seemingly unsolvable, was taking its toll. Yet, amid the storm of disappointment and self-doubt, a quiet epiphany was beginning to form. It came one evening when Elon was walking through the SpaceX headquarters. The building was mostly quiet, save for the hum of computers and the sound of workers focused on their tasks. But as Elon passed by the control room, he caught a glimpse of a young engineer hunched over a console, his face lit by the glow of a screen. The engineer was working on something that seemed trivial at first glance, yet it caught Elon's attention. "Why the late night?" Elon asked, stepping into the room. The engineer, startled, quickly stood up. "I was just working on some recalibration for the Falcon 9 engines. We had a minor issue during last week's test." Elon took a step closer, his curiosity piqued. "And what's the issue?" "It's nothing major, just a few tweaks with the pressure system. It's routine, really." The engineer looked down at the screen, but there was an urgency in his eyes, a spark that Elon recognized immediately. This wasn't just another adjustment, it was a challenge. Without thinking, Elon leaned over the engineer's shoulder. "Show me." The engineer hesitated for a second, but then began explaining. "Well, the thing is, if we make this change, we could increase the efficiency of the engines by about 5%. It's not huge, but with the upcoming Mars mission, every bit counts." Elon's eyes narrowed, and his mind began racing. A 5% improvement, while seemingly small, could be monumental in the grand scheme of interplanetary travel. If they could get this right, it could be the breakthrough they needed, an incremental step that would push the mission closer to success. "Elon," the engineer said tentatively, "do you think we should focus on this right now? I mean, with the Mars mission setback, maybe we should—" Elon cut him off, a fire igniting within him. "This is it. This is the breakthrough we need. Sometimes, it's not the big, flashy solutions that make the difference. It's the small, meticulous steps that get us where we need to go. This tweak, this minor adjustment, could be the difference between success and failure on Mars." The engineer blinked, then smiled, understanding exactly what Elon was saying. Sometimes, greatness came in the smallest of packages, and it was those small victories that led to larger ones. Elon wasn't backing down. He was just recalibrating his approach. As Elon left the control room, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was a turning point, not just for SpaceX but for him as well. For weeks, he had been obsessed with the grand vision. The rockets, the missions, the race to Mars. But now, he was beginning to see the power of the small, quiet victories. The failure of the Mars mission hadn't been a sign of defeat. It had been a lesson in resilience. It had forced him to refocus, to look at the process in a new light. And in doing so, he had found a renewed sense of purpose. The next morning, he called an all-hands meeting with the entire SpaceX team. The room filled with the usual hustle and bustle, the chatter of engineers, designers, and mission specialists. They had all been working around the clock to figure out what went wrong. But this meeting was different. It wasn't about the failure. It was about what came next. "All right, listen up," Elon began, his voice calm but steady. "I know the Mars mission setback has left us all shaken, but this is not the end. It's the beginning of something new. We've been so focused on the big picture, on the massive leaps forward. But what I've learned is that sometimes the small steps, the ones that seem insignificant, are what make the biggest impact." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "We've made incredible strides. We're on the cusp of something that will change the world. But it's the work we do in the trenches, the little adjustments, the fine-tuning, that will get us there. I'm proud of all of you, and together, we will keep moving forward." The room fell silent for a moment, and then the applause began. It wasn't the kind of applause that came after a great victory. It was a quiet, determined acknowledgement of the path ahead. Elon knew they weren't done. They couldn't afford to be done. The days that followed were filled with renewed energy. Elon's recalibration wasn't just about fixing rockets. It was about fixing the very way they approach problems. Instead of focusing on the enormous challenges that seemed insurmountable, he began encouraging his team to celebrate the small victories along the way. And then came the day of the announcement. It was during a press conference, one that had been planned for weeks, where Elon would address the media about the future of SpaceX after the rocket explosion. The stakes were higher than ever. The world expected him to show signs of vulnerability, to back down, or even to admit defeat. But instead, Elon stood in front of the cameras with a calm confidence that surprised even those who knew him best. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elon began, his voice steady, We've had our setbacks, but setbacks don't define us. What defines us is how we rise, how we continue to push the boundaries of possibility, how we work together, and how we keep moving forward. Elon's resolve to move forward, despite the setbacks, did not go unnoticed. In fact, it became the subject of intense media scrutiny. The press, always eager to see a downfall, found themselves in a constant cycle of attempting to dismantle the progress SpaceX had made, while simultaneously marveling at Elon's ability to rise from the ashes. The public opinion was a double-edged sword, praise from some, ridicule from others. But now, it wasn't just about SpaceX's rockets or Tesla's innovations. It was about the man behind it all. The breaking point came when Elon agreed to an interview with one of the most well-known TV hosts in America, Jake Donovan. Donovan was known for his hard-hitting questions and unapologetic style, someone who had made a name for himself by challenging even the most powerful figures in the tech world. This wasn't just an interview. This was a battle of words. The stage was set in one of the most prestigious studios in New York. Cameras were rolling, the lights blinding, and the energy was palpable. Elon had done interviews before, but this one felt different. He wasn't just answering questions about space or electric cars. He was about to face a barrage of questions that cut to the heart of his character, his decisions, and his leadership. As the interview began, Jake Donovan wasted no time. Elon, the world's been watching your every move after the Mars rocket failure. You've been praised as a visionary and criticized as an overambitious billionaire. How do you respond to the growing concerns that your ambitions are outpacing your ability to deliver? Elon leaned back in his chair, his hands folded calmly in front of him. I think visionaries are often misunderstood. People only see the end result, the grand idea. They don't always see the years of work, the failures, or the learning that happened behind the scenes. We're constantly improving, constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Donovan wasn't satisfied with the answer. He pressed on, his voice sharp. But Elon, what about the critics? The ones who say you're risking too much, that your approach is reckless? There are those who argue that your desire to colonize Mars might be putting your companies, and even the public, at risk. What do you say to that? Elon's expression remained cool, but his eyes narrowed. It's easy to sit on the sidelines and criticize when you're not the one taking the risks. SpaceX is pushing the envelope. Yes, there are risks. There are always risks when you're trying to do something that's never been done before. But we are focused on the future of humanity. Jake leaned in, his next question a calculated strike. Isn't it true that your obsession with space travel is actually taking away from more immediate problems here on Earth? Climate change, inequality, social justice? How do you justify focusing on Mars when so many people here need help right now? The question landed like a punch. It was a challenge not just to Elon's business ventures, but to his very sense of purpose. Elon paused for a moment, his mind racing. He had anticipated this line of questioning, but now that it was here, it stung. I don't think it's an either/or situation, Elon responded, his voice steady, though there was a flicker of emotion behind his eyes. We can't ignore the problems we face on Earth. Climate change is a global crisis. But I believe the work we're doing at Tesla, the advancements we're making in renewable energy and electric vehicles, are part of the solution. And when we talk about Mars, it's not just about exploring a new planet. It's about ensuring the survival of our species. If we don't start thinking long-term, if we don't take bold risks, we're not going to have a future at all. Jake Donovan smirked. Bold risks, sure. But let's talk about those risks. The latest report on Tesla's quarterly earnings was disappointing. The production delays, the controversies over self-driving technology. Are you really telling me that all of this is part of some grand vision? Or is it simply the reality of a business that's in over its head? Elon's posture remained unchanged, but inside, the words felt like daggers. He had known that Tesla, SpaceX, and his other ventures would face criticism. But Jake's approach was personal. He was aiming to break down the man behind the companies. Elon understood that the media wasn't just interested in his business acumen anymore. They were digging into his character, his persona. That's not what's happening here, Elon answered, his voice sharper now, more defensive. Tesla has had its challenges, but we are moving in the right direction. We're improving every single day. And as for SpaceX, every failure is an opportunity to learn and grow. The critics don't see that. They don't see the progress we're making. But we do. And that's what matters. Jake Donovan, sensing that Elon was beginning to unravel, leaned forward for the kill. Some say you've become more concerned with your own public image than the success of your companies. How do you respond to that? The question hit harder than the rest. The accusation wasn't just about business or ambition. It was about Elon's very identity. It was a suggestion that he was more interested in being a celebrity than a true innovator. Elon's eyes hardened. My public image has never been my priority. I do what I do because I believe in it. I'm not here to play to the cameras or chase fame. I'm here because I want to change the world. And if that makes me a target for people like you, so be it. The tension in the room was palpable. The audience, who had been silent throughout the interview, now murmured quietly. Jake Donovan, sensing that he had pushed Elon to his limits, seemed to relish the moment. But Elon wasn't done. The words that came next were the ones that left everyone in the studio, and the millions watching at home, speechless. I've made mistakes, Jake. I'll keep making mistakes. But one thing I'll never do is stop pushing forward. The only way to fail is to give up. And that's not something I'm ever going to do. If you don't understand that, then maybe you should be asking yourself why. For a moment, the studio was silent. Jake Donovan's usual sharp comebacks had evaporated. The audience was stunned by the raw honesty of Elon's words. It wasn't just a defense of his vision. It was a declaration of his commitment. The interview ended, but the fallout was only just beginning. The next day, every headline in America carried some variation of the same story. Elon Musk destroys TV host. His response leaves America stunned and speechless. The viral clips of the interview spread like wildfire across social media, with people on both sides of the argument chiming in. But for Elon, the battle wasn't about winning or losing the media war. It was about staying true to his purpose, no matter the cost. The interview had been brutal, but it had shown the world something that had always been there beneath the surface. Elon Musk was more than just a visionary. He was a fighter. The media storm that followed Elon Musk's explosive interview with Jake Donovan only intensified his drive to push forward. While the critics and the media focused on the confrontation, Elon had only one thing on his mind: Mars. His vision had never wavered, and despite the personal attacks, the challenges, and the pressure from all sides, he felt more determined than ever to prove that the impossible was not only possible but within reach. In the weeks that followed, SpaceX underwent a quiet but powerful transformation. Elon's words during the interview resonated deeply with his team. His unapologetic commitment to their mission of reaching Mars ignited a renewed sense of purpose throughout the company. The engineers, the technicians, the mission specialists, all of them knew that what they were working on wasn't just a job. They were part of something much bigger than themselves. But the reality of space exploration meant that failure was always just a step away. Elon knew that better than anyone. It was a constant dance with danger, a race against time, and the overwhelming pressure to succeed. Yet in those quiet moments when the weight of the world seemed too much to bear, he found solace in the one thing that kept him grounded: the belief that humanity's future depended on their success. As the months passed, SpaceX made significant progress. The Mars mission, which had once seemed an impossible dream, was beginning to take shape. The team had solved key problems with the spacecraft's propulsion system, and the initial designs for the Mars base were being finalized. Elon's new approach of focusing on small, incremental improvements was paying off, but there was still a long road ahead. One day, while reviewing the latest test data in his office, Elon received an unexpected call. It was from a government official, a high-ranking member of NASA. He had requested a meeting with Elon to discuss a potential collaboration. At first, Elon was skeptical. NASA and SpaceX had always maintained a somewhat distant, professional relationship, but this felt different. The meeting was scheduled for the following week, and as the day approached, Elon's mind raced. What did NASA want? Were they offering support, or were they about to drop a bombshell that could derail everything? He didn't know, but he was ready for whatever came next. The day of the meeting arrived, and Elon walked into the NASA headquarters with the same calm determination that had carried him through countless other challenges. The room was filled with NASA's top engineers, strategists, and a few government officials. At the head of the table sat Administrator Bill Harper, the man who had initiated the request for the meeting. "Mr. Musk," Bill said with a smile, extending his hand. "Thank you for joining us today. We're well aware of the incredible progress SpaceX has made, and we've been following your work closely. We believe that your vision for Mars aligns closely with ours." Elon shook Bill's hand, keeping his expression neutral. "I'm glad to hear that. What's on your mind?" Bill leaned back in his chair, gathering his thoughts. "Well, as you know, NASA has its own long-term plans for space exploration. But with the advancements SpaceX has made, we believe there's a unique opportunity for us to collaborate. Specifically, we want to help accelerate the Mars mission. We've been working on a proposal, and we'd like to discuss how NASA and SpaceX can partner in this historic endeavor." Elon's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected this. Collaboration with NASA? It was the kind of endorsement that could change everything. "We're looking at providing additional funding, resources, and expertise," Bill continued. "NASA has decades of experience in space exploration, and we believe that by joining forces with SpaceX, we can make the Mars mission a reality much sooner than anyone thought possible." Elon sat back in his chair, his mind racing. The idea of working with NASA was both thrilling and daunting. On one hand, it was the validation he had dreamed of. On the other, it meant aligning with an organization that had its own bureaucratic red tape and government constraints. He had always valued SpaceX's autonomy, and the thought of sharing that control was unsettling. But as he looked around the room at the eager faces of the NASA team, he knew that this was the opportunity they had been waiting for. Together, they could achieve the unthinkable. They could turn Mars from a distant dream into a tangible reality. The future of humanity was at stake, and Elon knew that if he wanted to see it realized, he couldn't do it alone. "I'm intrigued," Elon said finally, his voice steady. "But I have one condition." Bill raised an eyebrow. "And what would that be?" "Elon Musk doesn't play by the rules just for the sake of following them," Elon said, his eyes locking with Bill's. "SpaceX has always done things differently. We take risks, we innovate, and we don't wait for permission to move forward. If we're going to work together, it has to be on our terms. If you're willing to take that risk with us, I'm in." The room was silent for a moment. It was clear that Elon was laying down the gauntlet. There would be no compromising on his vision, no slowing down to accommodate the pace of bureaucracy. NASA would need to step up to meet SpaceX's standards or risk being left behind. Bill leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "We can work with that, Mr. Musk. We've been watching your success, and we understand the importance of your approach. We're in." And just like that, SpaceX and NASA forged an unprecedented partnership. The news spread quickly, shaking the foundations of the space industry. The two giants, once competitors, were now united in a common goal: reaching Mars. For Elon, the announcement was bittersweet. The road to Mars was no longer just his to navigate. It was now a shared journey. But as he stood before the press, announcing the collaboration, he couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration. This was just the beginning. The path to Mars had taken its first giant leap, and with it, humanity's future was a little bit closer. As the press conference ended and Elon stepped off the stage, he felt the weight of the moment settle in. This was more than a triumph of technology. It was a triumph of vision, of resilience, and of the unrelenting belief that the impossible could be achieved. The battle wasn't over. In many ways, it had only just begun. But for the first time in a long while, Elon Musk felt that the future was no longer something to dream about. It was something they were about to make a reality. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. Let us know your thoughts.